On today's show, we're looking at the rise of ecovillages and alternative community living with Ithaca, New York's Ecovillage as our primary case study. My aim today, viewers, is that many of you will find inspiration in our discussion, perhaps employing certain sustainable practices from ecovillage life into your own, whether it be health, energy use, community relations, smart building practices. Either way, we're going to cover this today and look at, again, Ithaca, New York's Ecovillage as a case study, but also thinking about this from a global perspective. I'm your host, Chris Wofford.
And I'm Michele Belot.
Viewers, thank you for joining today. We'll ask for your participation as we get rolling today. First things first, we want to know who's in our audience today, so let's ask this one to kick things off. We want to know where you're joining us from, so shoot that QR code with your phone. Let us know where you're joining. We'll have another question to follow this in just a few minutes. So, Michele Belot, what makes an eco-village eco? What's the history behind them? What's your thinking as we get into today's conversation?
Yeah, so big question indeed. So eco-villages in a way are sort of revamping an old idea of, villages have been around forever, and this is actually the way we've used to live for thousands and thousands of years. And so we have we have changed this way of living in the last decades, and it's actually quite new in the sort of window of the history of humanity. It's just really a very short window, and that has affected a lot the ways we live. And the idea of Ecovillage is to try to actually find back a little bit some of the ideas that we had, the ways we used to live, to actually try to foster a more sustainable, a healthier, and basically a better way of life.
So what we're seeing here is some historical perspective and precedent for an eco-village style eco-village.
Exactly, and you see many of them still. Obviously, as you can hear, I'm from Europe, so that's a picture also from European villages where you basically have this old infrastructure where you can see people used to live in houses close to each other and used to know their neighbors and didn't have a car and so on. So now Ecovillage Ithaca is we're going to talk a lot about it, but Ecovillages in general try to recreate this idea, but also try to also incorporate new technologies, modern ways of living, such that you can have a little bit the best of all worlds, really.
Yeah, so I think what we're seeing here in a couple of the examples is the obvious thing that kind of sticks out, that buildings in close proximity, walkability, efficiency in that kind of way seems to be a through line for a lot of this.
Exactly. So you have, houses where you can walk to each other. It's interesting when you see just the invention of the car has actually influenced quite dramatically the way we design neighborhoods, because now people need to go around with their cars and so on.
Yeah.
And actually in most eco-villages still people will have a car, but you have to think quite hard about a way you can have a car, but also make it possible to still have a walkable neighborhoods. And walkability is important not just for, from an exercise point of view, but it's also because it's how you meet your neighbors or how you start conversations. And all of that is very important to build community, to exchange relevant information, and so on.
Yeah, exactly. Let me see if the poll preserved. I think I got a little excited and jumped the gun. There we go. So that's who's joining us today in the audience. As predicted, an international audience, a lot of New Yorkers in the house, which it makes me wonder how many are part of our local eco village here. But yeah, we've got people representing from Delhi, Manila, right? Surrey, there you go. India, Boston. Nice international audience. Hopefully we'll get some international perspective as it relates to questions. Speaking of which, audience, so you can enter your questions in the chat, and I'll receive them here. So if you have questions for Professor Belot, please put them there. So let's move to our next question, Michele. Just wondering, who among our international audience has experience with eco-villages? Do you have any firsthand experiences with eco-villages? Yes, I was or am a current resident of an eco-village. I have visited an eco-village. That's where I am. And yes, I was, there we go. I have no direct experience or firsthand experience with an eco-village. So it looks like at this point, maybe a smaller data set, but for the most part, people don't really have too much familiarity as far as we can tell here. Any surprise?
No, that's great. That's great. I mean, I think that in a way, I think you all have some familiarity with eco-villages because the idea will be, there are lots of ideas that are things that everyone will recognize. But it's true that the concept, and was new to me actually until 5 years ago, I didn't know about eco-villages either, and I found it really a fascinating, interesting concept.
So let's talk about you for a second. So as an economics professor, as an economist, and a one-time eco-village dweller, can you tell us about your experience as a scholar who studies economics, health, behavioral, human behavioral issues, and how these elements kind of come together in your work? What's your eco-village experience?
Yeah, so I lived there for 2 years, and I found it really interesting. So in my research, I'm interested in behavioral change. And I should say that I didn't go to Ecovillage to do research. I didn't do research on Ecovillage. Yeah. But of course, I'm interested in seeing this of human behavior in action. So I'm interested in behavioral change. And of course, we have many, very important crises to deal with at the moment, whether it has to do with climate change, also with health. We have, a lot of burden of lifestyle-related diseases. And so I'm interested in my research in what are the sort of barriers to change. And what is puzzling is when you ask people, and particularly when it comes to the environment, it's quite interesting. It seems like everybody's on board. People are actually really quite motivated and thinks, yes, we should do something about it. Everybody is actually, motivated or would like to do something about it. But somehow there's something that doesn't translate into actually implementing or going forward and implementing the changes. And so we're interested in understanding what are these barriers. And what is, I think, quite notable is that we know now that, even small costs make it, hard for people to change. So it doesn't have to be, we are not talking about, if you're not going to make a change because it costs thousands of dollars to do so. No, just really even minor things that are not that costly immediately sort of pushes people off. And so what I find interesting in a concept like Ecovillage is that there's been a lot of thought about how to make it as easy as possible for people to live in a sustainable and healthy way. So it's easy when, you have the recycling bins that are there, and actually it's explained very clearly what you should do, what you should put in what bin. There is a very nice infrastructure for electric cars, so it's very easy. I just have to plug in my car, in there, and I don't have to think much about it. It's easy to compost. So again, there's lots of people behind who have actually thought about the design of this infrastructure. But once this cost has been, invested in, basically, then for the others, it makes it very, very easy to actually do these changes. And it's actually quite amazing to see that, for example, in terms of energy use and resources use and so on, they managed to cut this energy use by 40%. I think this is the number, and that is actually it's not that this is not these are not places that are necessarily off grid and try to basically not use electricity or something. They just have the modern appliances. They have everything that you would expect to find in a modern home, but it's just really thought through how to use and not waste energy, basically.
And there's an intentionality around the construction of the homes themselves, right? You had discussed that they're typically kind of smaller scale, built for energy efficiency. So there's a lot of energy savings that comes from that, right? The home building itself.
Exactly. So there's been a lot of thinking in the design of each of these neighborhoods. So in Ecovillage Ithaca, there are basically 3 neighborhoods that have been built at different time periods, and every time trying to use the technologies that were available to design these houses in the most eco-friendly way. It's true that the scale is interesting because the houses tend to be smaller than the average home in American home. And one of the reasons is that they built what is called a shared sort of common house where you can share things. Like there's a library, there's a big playroom for kids, there are guest rooms, there's even office space. So it's not that you need, these extra rooms in your house that you actually hardly ever use, but you need them for, grandmas coming to visit, once in every, from time to time, and here you actually don't need that, and therefore you can save on space.
Ithaca, New York. Let's get it into our Ecovillage here. So you had mentioned it. I mean, Ithaca is a city of 30,000 people, 30,000 residents, 20,000 with the additional students at Cornell University and Ithaca College. Ithaca enjoys a national and kind of a global reputation as a progressive, forward-thinking city that naturally an Ecovillage kind of makes perfect sense here. It's right across the way at West Hill here. Tell us a little bit about Ithaca's. Let's take a look at a couple slides here. So,
so this is Ecovillage Ithaca, which is indeed located on one of the hills of Ithaca. It's a few miles from downtown. So this is the first neighborhood, actually, which has a very nice view on the pond. It's quite idyllic, but when you are there, it's actually really beautiful as well. And so it's not only the picture, it's actually very nice. Mm-hmm. And then you have, these three neighborhoods, and I think we have, so this is the second neighborhood, which is called Song. So they have also these cool names, but that was built in later, so 10 years later, and it's the houses there are a bit bigger, and the paths is also so they are further apart. So it's kind of interesting. You have these three neighborhoods that have a different vibe and different spirit. And the last one is Tree, which was built around 10 years ago, and was using really a lot of the houses there are passive, so they use the technology from I think Germany to build houses there. And here you also see there is an apartment complex. So the bottom is actually the common space, common house, but there's also apartments there which are made and the houses as well. Both the apartments and houses are made accessible. So there are people with disabilities or older people who have mobility issues who can also more easily live there.
I want to think about, just to kind of reiterate here, there are 100 homes in Ithaca's Ecovillage.
Yes, so around 100 homes.
This is, and is this about the size of what you would find in an Ecovillage internationally? I mean, we kind of discussed this a little bit before. Are there unifying principles that most Ecovillages design themselves around?
Yes, so they are unifying principles. The size is not one of them, actually. Okay. There are different sizes. It can go from, just having maybe a few houses to actually having a bigger community. Ecovillage Ithaca is actually one of the biggest communities. And the unifying principles is really the idea of having indeed a community. So, but there's going to be variations to this. So, for example, in Ecovillage Ithaca, it's still the case that everybody has their own private home with the layout you would expect. Everybody has their own kitchen and bathroom and so on. Sure. But so it's not a commune. That's what I want to sort of clarify. There's going to be also variations in how much energy is coming from the outside or not. There are some ecovillages that are completely off-grid, others that are still relying on energy coming from the outside. The same with food. So again, Ecovillage Ithaca has farms that are on the land, but they also villagers also go and buy food elsewhere in shops or in the farmers market, whatever.
Is this costly? Is this a costly endeavor? Is there kind of an exclusive kind of aspect to this? What's it like? I mean, are homes prohibitively expensive? It costs a lot of money to build a home these days. What's the deal? Who can afford to live in a Ecovillage?
So in terms of housing costs, so it sort of per square feet, it tracks quite well the sort of prices in the local area. It is true that you would in addition to buying your home, you're also, basically buying a share of the land. You're actually not buying your home; you're buying a share of the co-op, really. And so you're also going to be contributing to the shared facilities and so on. It's something. Affordability is certainly, something that Ecovillages think a lot about. I know the experience of, Ecovillage Ithaca, where they've tried and they've actually obtained grants and help to support more low-income households to be able to come in. But it is true that it's still, it's not necessarily a cheap alternative. It's not an expensive alternative either. So it's sort of a little bit in the middle. I certainly think that for what you get, in a sense of like once you are there and you have access to a really large, area that is a common area, it's actually very, very nice. Yeah.
I asked you before the show started today, is there strength and efficiency in numbers? Meaning, does the Ecovillage have some kind of purchasing power? You talked about savings with energy. Are there any other sort of benefits to having this, 100 people sort of living intentionally closely?
Yeah, so there are lots of benefits, and again, as an economist, I'll be referring to the concept of returns to scale. But there's definitely lots of returns to scale there. So in terms of even just sharing information, so this is really important. You share information about things that may be relevant to others. But also, of course, when you buy things, there are efforts to try to buy things in bulk. When you think about infrastructure, you might indeed be able to share the cost of certain things with others. Like, for example, for the infrastructure for electric cars, that makes a big difference if you are just yourself in your house trying to buy the appropriate equipment versus being, in a place like that where you can share some of the costs with others.
Exactly. Tools, hardware, everything that you can kind of imagine, right? Is shared effectively.
Yeah, so the tools, there is a very nice, very cool tool shop, actually, which is, unbelievable. You would never be able to have this in your own home, right? And there it makes a lot of sense. You pay, I believe it's $10 a month, and then you are a member of this thing where you can access, these really nice tools to work with wood and to do your own thing and so on. And the same with all the equipment. If you think about, you go around Ithaca and you see, everybody has to have their own snowblower or their lawnmower or whatever. Of course, it's really great if you can share a few of these big, bulky things with others.
How about, the community intimacy aspect as part of it? You had mentioned before that, it's not for everyone. Can you talk about a couple things? First of all, how you got involved. You mentioned that you came for a 5-day visit and got to learn a little bit about it. So that's just sort of my first question. And the second is thinking about, are there things that might deter people from doing this, right? It's not for everybody. Who, talk about the kind of person that it would suit, and maybe this lifestyle that wouldn't suit a certain personality type. The introvert who prefers to be isolated, that kind of thing.
Well, that's interesting you mentioned that. Maybe just responding on this is that I think we do actually, Ecovillage Ithaca does have a few people who are more on the introvert side and so on. So I think what is most important is that people share the values and the mission of the village more than the actual personality type, whether you're outgoing or not, or because in fact, and again, I can mostly speak about the experience of Ecovillage Ithaca, but it is true that there is a lot of respect for privacy as well. So the idea is that when you're in your own home, you are in your own home, and it's not that you go out and people jump at you, and not at all. It's more, it's very respectful, and so it's not the case that you necessarily need to. You're not going to be living in a commune. This is not going to be the vibe you're going to get. But it is at the same time very nice. You just step out and you actually meet others and can engage in conversations. So the people who would be really attracted, I think, to this concept are people who are interested in reducing their environmental impact, who share these values, who want to live in a more connected way with their neighbors, without, and I think this is important to break this stereotype. It's not good that you're going to be having to spend 100% of your time with others. You are actually will have your private life, and sometimes I'm always amazed by actually how quiet Ecovillage sometimes is. There is a lot of people living there, and there are many periods where it's just very, very nice and quiet. Yeah.
And you must spend some energy assuring people that this is not a commune, right? Your privacy is, we're not sharing everything, right?
Exactly. So this is interesting that there is a lot of stereotypes and images that go about what it is to be in an eco-village, and it's true that what has been interesting, and this I think all the credit goes to the founders who really wanted to propose a realistic alternative to mainstream living that didn't, mean that we all need to go and live in the woods without electricity, and I don't know.
Yeah.
It's actually quite mainstream in that sense. Yeah.
You took a good look in your work and are interested in the intersection of mental health as it relates to living in a community, loneliness, some of the other things that contribute to mental health. Can you talk a little bit about that and how you think about this as an economist who has lived in Ecovillage?
Yeah, so I think that there's a lot of emphasis on lifestyle diseases and mental health, and certainly after the pandemic there was even more emphasis on mental health issues. And it is true that there are now quite a number of studies that show that loneliness is a very important factor in actually health decline, mental health issues. And so certainly here when you see basically projects that try to recreate communities in a way that is a natural way, I think it really goes back to something we can all resonate with, that is very primitive in a way. We are social beings, and we have been living in communities for a long time. So the idea to be able to have people around you, are there, you can rely on, they can rely on you. You get this very sort of nice bonding experience, which I think is very conducive to mental health and health as well.
I think we all understood what that was about to some degree with the pandemic, right? No matter who you were, where you were living, you understood that instinct and that desire to be around other people and social. It's within us.
Exactly. And that was, in fact, a challenging time for a place like Ecovillage, where they rely so much on human connections, and they have things like social gatherings and so on to try to, indeed have these sort of social interactions. I moved there during the pandemic, in the middle of the pandemic, and I actually found it quite nice because relative to any other neighborhood probably I could have lived in the pandemic, it was definitely a neighborhood where at least when you step out your house, you could actually see people and you could have some conversations and you could feel somewhat connected. They also have a system that has its drawback, but they do have a system where everybody's connected via an email list. Mm-hmm. And of course that also creates a connection, but that also means that if someone is sick, you could, rely on others to potentially, do groceries for you. And that was also something that really was very easy to organize.
We have a question from viewer Rodrigo who asks, do you think there will be more eco-villages in the U.S. in upcoming years? Tough question, but really this is the point of it. Are there organizations that provide resources and help to start your own eco-villa? Great that you mentioned that, Rodrigo. We do have a couple resources here. So we do have the URL for Ecovillage Ithaca. Another organization called Thrive. Can you tell us a little bit about that? What's Thrive's deal?
Yeah, so Thrive is the education arm of Ecovillage Ithaca, and there's a lot of effort. The idea, the main goal of Thrive really is to actually bring the lessons from Ecovillage Ithaca to the rest of the world. So how to start an eco-village? There are actually also online resources that are available. We try to organize, quite regularly workshops that are either online or on site, where we try to, explain the basics. And then there are sort of broader resources available because now there are indeed more and more eco-villages around the world. So it's easier to get information on how to build these eco-villages. But yeah.
And we also have the resource, the global...
Ecovillage network, yes.
That's jam-packed with resources on...
Yes, so that's really nice. Lots and lots of resources on this web page, and you can also even see a map where you can maybe find the closest eco-village to where you live. Many eco-villages are open to visitors, and so if you contact them, you can probably go and visit. We have at Ecovillage Ithaca, we organize also regularly tours where people can go and see what it is. They can even do an immersion weekend if they want to. So yeah, there are lots of ways to learn about eco-villages.
Ecovillage Ithaca has enjoyed, it sounds like a couple decades, right? It's been around a couple decades of growth, right? Incremental growth. Do you find challenges once we get to a certain size? You know, obviously human organization and you know, there's that magic number of more than 150 people. Things get complicated. Any observations that you've kind of observed as the Ecovillage has grown? You don't have that deep historical perspective, but I think you know what I'm getting at.
Yes, exactly, and I think this is something that is talked about quite a bit. You know, what is the optimal size? And I know there were conversations when the third neighborhood was built about whether this was going to be, you know, too many people or not. And it's true there is this magic number by the anthropologist Robin Dunbar, which says 150 is
that what the number is? Okay, I wasn't sure about that.
We can keep track of.
Yeah.
What my experience has been that it is true that it's probably hard at this point to know everybody personally. When you have 300 people, it's hard to have a personal connection. Yeah. On the other hand, it has the advantage that if you have 300 people, you don't necessarily have to get along with everybody, right? You can actually have people you are closer to and you're friends with, and you can maybe have you have more chances to find people you really relate to with when there are more people around. But it's true there is a little bit of a trade-off in sort of finding the right size is not obvious. Here, what they did, I think it was interesting, is to divide it in 3 neighborhoods. So each neighborhood is a little bit like the little eco-village with 100 people every time. And so that tends to work well. So people know each other very well and will actually know the people in their sort of neighborhood directly.
I have a question from Ronnie, a viewer who checks in and says, we are working on the design of an affordable housing project where we'd like to add the Ecovillage principles. How do you suggest we do that? Maybe this is outside of your purview, but what do you think of that question?
So I think that the principles of Ecovillage go well with affordable housing in principle, because you can think about all the resources that you can save on by having shared facilities and think about having what are the things that you don't necessarily need on a regular basis and that makes sense to share. So these are the things that could be nice to actually try to think about when you design a development that is targeting affordable housing. And then I'm not an expert indeed in the sort of all these technical issues that have to do with the housing built and the materials that you can choose. I know there's been a lot of thought about that in Ecovillage, and there are resources available again on describing what Ecovillage Ithaca has been investing in and what they've done and so on.
So in addition to, affordable housing, one thing that we talked about that I think is interesting is I was asking you, what are the demographics of people that move there? You had cited families, right? A great place to raise children. What about elderly people who are retired? How does it suit people of all different ages and backgrounds?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So it is very diverse, and when the Ecovillage was founded, I guess it was mostly families with young children. So they all actually grew old. Yeah. They all became older. So and there is actually a constant effort to try to make sure that you keep a good balance in demographics, because of course children always will always grow old. We all go in the same direction. So
Yeah.
So if you don't have new people coming in or people having lots of babies, at some point you will become an older village. But it is a nice mix of people who are older and families, and you get indeed these connections across households of children who actually go and run to other older people to play with them. And we've had my personal experience was indeed my daughter got really close to a number of older people in the village, and that was very nice to see. Yeah.
I have in my notes, this is kind of an incomplete prompt or question, but I think it's important to ask because I love what you said when we talked about it. Your overarching sort of philosophy on experimentation as it relates to an endeavor like this. Can you talk about the role of willingness to experiment, the willingness to experience new things?
Yes, so I think that's fascinating because when we think about habits and the ways we live, often when we have to think about doing something else, it is actually quite scary. It's sort of, I don't necessarily know what I'm getting myself into, certainly going into live in an eco-village, but even maybe another example I often cite is changing your diet, if you want to actually now eat less meat or become vegan even. These are all like things that seem to be really, people have lots of stereotypes about that. And so we've done, this is actually research work where we have tried to see if giving people the opportunity to experiment can actually help alleviating these sort of stereotypes and actually maybe encourage them to adopt these behaviors. And we have some evidence that it might be indeed helpful.
What would be an example?
So we had an example of a study we did where we asked people to taste vegan cheese. And of course, if you ask beforehand, would you like to taste this vegan cheese, or what would be your willingness to pay for a vegan cheese, then it tends to be quite low because, first of all, there's the term vegan, but also it's true that vegan cheese have not, yet quite a great reputation for this.
Yeah.
But so it's really hard because it's also not so cheap to just experiment and buy something in the shop. You might be worried about waste. You might be worried about not wasting your money and wasting the actual produce. And so we did an experiment where we gave the opportunity to experiment, so they could basically taste, which is something that is well known. Obviously, is that there's lots of companies who go into trying to get people to taste things so that you know what it is before you buy it. But that had a really substantial effect on people's openness. And what was interesting is that then it didn't really matter whether you tell them whether it's a vegan product or not. The willingness to pay was then substantially higher and remained so whether they knew it was vegan or not. And so I thought it was encouraging to sort of think about that. And in the context of eco-village living, or living in a bit of a different way, and maybe it's completely orthogonal to my research, but they also organize this sort of experience weekends where you can go and spend a couple of days. You can actually go pretty much whenever, because there are a number of Airbnbs and sort of bed and breakfast that exist on site where you can just go and see what it's like. When you have an experience weekend, it's really thought through to really tell you, give you more information about what it is like to live there, and there's going to be workshops and things like that. But so no, I can only encourage. The thing is that I don't think the idea is to get everybody to think they should go and build their eco-village, or that they should move to an eco-village even. But there are lots of ideas and suggestions that I think one can implement in the sort of mainstream world that are interesting.
As I mentioned in my intro, I mean, that was one of my aims today for today's discussion, was to, short of founding and creating and building your own eco-village yourself, or embarking on an endeavor with several other people, I was interested in some of the key takeaways that we can all bring to the way that we live in our own communities. What are some that sort of jump out at you as some that you think are easily transferable?
Yes, one thing that is perhaps super easy to translate is to try to to create a little bit of a more of a community with the people who live directly around you. So, for example, know who they are, but also maybe have a contact list. And now we have, with all the technologies we have, like WhatsApp or, you know, a Facebook group or whatever, you can easily sort of have a group where it's going to be your choice how much you engage with or not. But it is kind of nice. Think about, you know, having a WhatsApp group with the I don't know, the other parents who live in the same neighborhood and so on. And maybe it's nice then if you want to know who is around to play or something, you can actually use this group. Or if you have, you know, want to have a recommendation for something like a plumber or something, these are things that can work really well with just having some kind of either a mailing list or WhatsApp group or something. And then the other thing that may be a bit more involved, but just indeed getting to know your neighbors so that you actually exchange relevant information, you know, of course, potlucks, barbecues, things like that. Everybody loves that. So organizing that for your block or for your neighborhood can be a nice thing. And then other things that are maybe, again, require a little bit of organization, but not that much, is to think about ways to perhaps share some big things, like whatever. I'm taking the example of the snowblower because we are in Ithaca. It could be an example where you might be thinking maybe just talk to a few neighbors and think about, you know, could you actually share some of these resources and how could that work?
Yeah, the community tool shed is one that's very attractive to me. And we also talked about just sensible consumption, right? Children's baby clothes, right? They grow out of them in weeks, right? And so, you know, having a pipeline for reusing clothing is obviously a natural good fit.
Yes,
things like that.
And of course, so in Ithaca, for example, we have a number of places that really are, you know, the main goal is to try to have, you know, reusing things and so on, and it's well organized. But it is true that in Ecovillage Ithaca, there's a dedicated room that's called a reuse room, and it's probably one of the favorite rooms of lots of people because you have all these treasures there that, you know, it's basically people that put stuff that they don't want to use anymore, but then for you it's like, oh, that's quite interesting, and it's it works really well for clothes, for toys, but also for other things. I mean, we all have things in our basement that are things that we think, well, actually, if I could donate this, I would probably be happy to donate it. So this is, I think it takes it's a bit more involved because maybe you need to organize an event or you need to organize maybe a room somewhere, but it's something that is, I think, really useful.
Are there issues of governance? I don't know. The one thing that we haven't talked about, we just talked about sort of the natural social connection, the interweaving of fabric and living sensibly and intentionally. But what about governance? What about boards, committees? How is that all structured? And here's what made me think of that. We had a viewer who asks, what is the primary reason ecovillages fail? Now, I don't know if you know about any case studies, but I would suspect it would be because of normal human organizational reasons.
Maybe, but I think that one thing. So I'm presenting this as it's easy living and so on, and it's true that once you are there, it's relatively easy living. But there's been like burning souls before who actually put a lot of hours and effort to actually put this together, right? Okay. And I can see that before you actually get there, you might actually not have, you might have people who actually pull off because it's just too much investment to actually do this. And this is why I think it's important to think that, it's not that we all need to go and build an eco-village, because I think it's a very big commitment to go and build an eco-village. Mm-hmm. But it is true that once you are there, so many eco-villages have a governance system that is based around the idea of collective decision-making, where everybody is involved in the decision-making process, which is something we are not necessarily used to, whether it's at work or in our usual sort of public life. We usually don't participate in many decisions, so it's an interesting process. It's time. It can be time consuming. I think it's quite interesting to see that it gives a voice to everybody. And it's something where I even thought, okay, I actually took some of these principles to some of the meetings I have that are more work related, where the idea is that instead of having, one person who dominates a meeting and just tells their opinion, and then everybody is like, doesn't dare to say anything, which is sometimes the case, then you actually have here a more structured approach where there will be, basically they ensure that everybody has the time and has the opportunity to say something. Now the one challenge is that the goal is to make sure that everybody is on board with decisions that are taken, and that means it takes time. It takes time to get everybody on board, to adjust whatever is the proposal that we have, to make sure that it incorporates or it addresses the concerns of everyone. So it's certainly, it's interesting. It's somewhat time-consuming, but it is. I think many people who live there would say that it is time well invested, because it also reinforces the social fabric, and at the same time, everybody feels, sort of involved in the decision. Now, this is the part where it might be that some people think, well, this is, just too much time for me, and I don't have time for that.
Yeah, I totally understand that. How about urban versus rural? Are there any hyper-urban scenarios where ecovillages have worked? I've seen, sort of, land use that was formerly, occupied by squatters that eventually became something formal and intentional. I'm thinking about Copenhagen, and there's some, examples in Berlin and stuff like that. Urban versus rural. What's the deal?
So sure, I think that there are good examples of urban co-housing communities that work very well as well. I think the one distinction maybe is that obviously when you are in a sort of more rural area and you have a lot more land, you can potentially have indeed more local produce and farms on your own grounds. But even in the urban versions, there's often efforts to actually also have some form of local food production that is organized. So I think this is actually it's possible to do it in whatever environment one is in. It's just that you need to obviously tailor the infrastructure to the environment.
What about walks of life within the community that lives in that might, so in your experience, that lived at Ecovillage, right? Were there other people that worked at Cornell? We have an interesting demographic here, right? Ithaca is effectively, as far as I understand, the smallest city in New York State. Again, 30,000 residents. Does that make a city? I'm not sure, but politically and municipally, we are structured like a city. But if you think about the surrounding demographics, you go 2 miles out of town and it's rural. That's what we're kind of dealing with. What was your experience like as far as the types of people that live there?
So it is diverse actually, and there are indeed people who are related to the two biggest education institutions around here, so Cornell University and Ithaca College. But then there is really a diversity of people doing different things, who can be self-employed or who can be employed in other sort of companies around the area. It tends to be like Ithaca. It tends to be politically more, left wing. But it's still. I found it interesting because I think it's really a nice human experience. And actually, as an academic, you tend to meet a lot of people who are actually very aligned in your views. So it's for me it was nice to actually be in an environment where there is a bit more diversity in terms of where people come from, what are their personal histories. So there is a lot of discussions or conversations about how to increase diversity along race, but also along socioeconomic background, because it's true that it's probably mostly middle class sort of kind of demographics. And so there are conversations about how to change that, how to maybe have more subsidized housing, or how to basically make it attractive for others to join.
Now, as far as like real estate sustainability, rather long-term sustainability, the real estate, there's been, like we mentioned, incremental growth. Is it hard to sell or buy a house in an eco-village, at least like this one here?
So it's an interesting, it's a different market, right? Because it's not, I don't know if one can call that, it's you are going to be, so every person is selling their own house like they normally would. Usually it's advertised first in the village and then it's advertised more broadly. But the typical people who are going to be interested are people who have already shown interest before and who have already visited Ecovillage and indeed are in the process of actually moving there, and they're just waiting for the right house.
We have a couple more viewer questions. By the way, viewers, if you do have any questions, please submit them. We've got a little bit of time left. And this is kind of going back a little bit earlier, but some key architectural features of an eco-village. You had mentioned the public space, public access to charging your car and things along those lines. Any of those things that you find that were intentionally designed that you think are kind of notable? You had mentioned the proximity to the ponds, right? They're a key part of it. Everyone swims there, everyone skates there. What about some of the other sort of smart design kind of principles mark an eco-village?
Yeah, so one thing, and maybe coming back first to the car, because I think the car is responsible for a lot of issues with designing, mainstream neighborhoods and probably basically cutting these neighborhoods. You have these roads going through and so on. And here it's quite challenging if you think about how do I actually design a village where it's a walkable village, but at the same time everybody still wants to have a car to basically leave the village and go and do their thing. And so here I think there's been a lot of thought in that, whether, the ideal solution has been found is something that, is always, you can always discuss it, because at the moment we have basically the parking is in the middle of the three neighborhoods, but the three neighborhoods are connected. You can basically walk through the three neighborhoods without going through the parking. But there is something about that I find quite interesting. It's really something to think about, how to make it, people may one day abandon their cars, but I don't think we're quite there yet. And so I think the idea of trying to make sure that people can still be mobile, but at the same time keep this walkability is very, very interesting. And then these common houses, I think, are very nice because they make it, all of a sudden you go in this common house and you feel like, wow, I have a lot of space. And it is your space as well when you live there. And you can, there's a library room, and the playrooms obviously are very popular with kids. But there's also like a big, area for cooking and for having dinners, which is actually also something you can use if you want to organize a party. So again, if you want to invite a lot of people from outside the village, actually you can book this room, and all of a sudden you also have like these great, big pots and big things that you can use to do things. And instead of having those in your house to clutter your house for the one party you might organize every year, you actually have you use it once there, and then it's a sort of shared facility.
How about incentivization to live in a community like that? We have energy subsidies. If you wanted to go install a geothermal unit in your house, you could do that kind of thing. Again, that goes back to that scalability, strength in numbers kind of stuff. Any additional things that an eco-village might be able to pull off that an otherwise organized community, let's say in Fall Creek in Ithaca, may not be able to?
Yeah, so I think they have tried, and they have been successful in a number of times to actually get grants for specific projects or specific things related to affordable housing or related to the electric infrastructure for cars. So it's true that there are local organizations, or even sometimes at the state level, that try to indeed give subsidies for this type of initiatives. So it's certainly, I think there's certainly room to actually get external funding. It's hard work, you need to actually, go and apply and justify this. But it's certainly, there is opportunities do exist. Yeah.
Were there any surprises that you went through? Looking back historically, right? It's been you're a year removed or something like that. If you look back and say, "Wow, this is one thing that I was really surprised to kind of realize either about myself or my community or whatever," and anything, So just tell me a little bit about that.
So several things. So one is that it was more mainstream than I thought, in a sense that you don't know who are the people who live there and so on, and in a way I sort of thought, well, it actually feels very normal, very there are people around there who are like me, who are like, it doesn't feel like I'm moving into a strange community. Yeah. The second is the quietness, I would say, because again, you sort of may be concerned that when you have 300 people living on a small square footage at the end of the day, whether this will be actually something where, I don't know, it will be noisy and it will be difficult to sleep or whatever. And that's not at all the case. Yeah. It's very quiet. I'm always impressed by how, at 9 o'clock, it's basically feels like it's very quiet. And of course, people are very respectful and know that, there are others around and so on. It's, I think, something that comes also naturally. And then the third is maybe the diversity in ways of life, even within a community that still shares a lot. You still have quite a diversity of opinions and of approaches to parenting, for example, is one thing that that comes across so overall I think there is a great degree of tolerance and respect, but I think that it's not the case that I think if one is considering moving to an eco-village, it's very important to go and see whether it suits you first in terms of way of living, but also whether there is a match with the community. And I certainly did really like many people at Ecovillage. So the reason I actually decided to move out, because I thought I was driving too much between Ecovillage and my work.
I think you were.
But otherwise, yes, no. So I'm trying to now create my Ecovillage on the other side of Ithaca, but
the Ecovillage of your mind. Very good, Michele. I mean, that was exactly the perspective I was hoping to get today, right? To inform people who are either considering it or just curious, what's it like as a person, not only as an economist, but as a human being who strives to live in a more intentional, sustainable way. So I appreciate you coming in today. Thank you so much, Michele.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a great conversation.
And thanks for the questions, viewers. One more time, let's share those resources with you. We have the Global Ecovillage Network URL, in addition to the Ithaca Ecovillage URL as well. So a couple resources to check out if you're even mildly curious about any of this. So thanks, everyone, for joining. We'll see you at the next keynote. Thank you so much.